Welcome back to another episode of Inclusive Justice, a sacred call to action. I am Kelsea Hector, pronouns she, they, your local UU non-binary pagan. We're here to unpack the intersection of sacred spaces and justice and how religious communities can orient themselves around action to create more inclusive community. Today we have Pastor Tom with us to kind of give us an insight into Sycamore Creek and what y'all are doing over there. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and Sycamore Creek?
Yeah, after your introduction, I feel like I'm feeling less qualified even more now because I'm Pastor Tom Arthur from Sycamore Creek Church. He, him. I don't have anything like unusual. It's all normative.
That's beautiful.
I'm hetero, cisgender, Protestant, Jesus follower.
Okay.
But hopefully with a really wide open posture to the, what you said, non-binary pagan.
Yeah,
you
non-binary pagan.
Yeah. No, I love the stuff that you're doing and walk with anyone of goodwill.
Awesome. Yeah.
Is I think what your posture generally in life is as well.
Absolutely. I try at least, right?
Yeah.
So Sycamore Creek, why don't you tell us where you're located, what y'all do? I know you guys are doing some really fantastic things over there, and I would love for the listeners to hear more about what y'all have been doing.
Thank you. So I'm the second pastor of Sycamore Creek, which means I follow the founding pastor, which is usually a job nobody wants. But I didn't know that until I was already in it.
So you had no expectation of the fact you didn't want it?
Yeah, in 2009, I was appointed by our bishop. We're a United Methodist Church. Was appointed by our bishop to be the pastor at Sycamore Creek as the founding pastor was retiring. Her name was Barb Flory. She was kind of a rebel grandma.
I love that. That should be a punk song.
Yeah, I don't know any grandmas who started churches, but she did.
That's awesome.
So she started a church. When I became the pastor, we were setting up and tearing down in a school every week. They had done that for 13 years. I did it till 2013 or something like that.
Oh, wow.
We were a church plant out of Holt United Methodist Church, so we had a very sort of white, suburban, moderate, left of center, but not talk about it.
Yeah.
Because let's not start waves kind of culture. And eventually over time, as I've been there, I've led us to buy our first building in South Lansing, just up the street from Potter Park Zoo, Mount Hope in Pennsylvania. And somewhere in that whole process, we launched a church and a diner and a church and a pub. I like to say that my sermons get better the more beers that you drink, and they get really good the more beers I drink.
There you go.
Unfortunately, COVID shut those things down because it shut everything down where you could meet in third spaces like that, and then we just haven't rebounded since then. We had a rural church come to us, Potterville United Methodist Church, and they were struggling and asked if we would adopt them. And adoption is basically where they give up the leadership of their church. Okay. So the board, there's not a separate board at that campus. There's not a separate trustees, finance. It's all one.
So all their administration kind of dissolves.
Yes.
And you take that spot.
Yes.
Okay.
All their administration dissolves. Which they found really refreshing. We've done this twice now. For the most part, Each of those churches has found it really refreshing to not have to do administration and to just instead do the justice and ministry and outreach kind of work, meeting needs kind of work that the people really want to do. They don't really want to be in administration unless you have a unique, special personality and calling and temperament and whatever. And there are those kind of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thankfully.
It's not me. So I give you props.
You just don't need one. You don't need like that for every single 100-person church or whatever. You can combine them together. So we have a rural campus now. Potterville United Methodist Church became Sycamore Creek Potterville. And then several years ago, it was maybe two and a half, Asbury United Methodist Church up on Lake Lansing Road across from Eastwood Town Center came to us and asked us the same thing. They were really struggling after COVID, down to 15 to 20 people. And we said, yeah, we'd be willing to explore the adoption, but we want you to know we're going to shut it down for a year. We're going to remodel it as a performing arts center and an incubator kitchen for food startup businesses as well as our church.
That's awesome.
And
where did the idea come from?
Wow, where did the idea come from? So,
because it's not something you hear often, like, oh, we're going to open a new church, but actually it's this dual purpose space, which is beautiful.
So there's like the big vision where the idea came from, and then there's the really local, like, who are the people talking about this, where it came from. So the big vision where it came from is I've been involved in church planting in the United Methodist Church for most of my time of being a pastor, 15 years. And I've just had the chance to sit in the front row of watching how all kinds of United Methodist churches have done unique and creative things across the world, really. Yeah. And in some ways, even beyond the United Methodist Church, there's the Methodist Church, which in Europe is declined. I mean, churches in Europe in general have declined significantly. And so they're having to think really creatively. And so you mix a lot of those things together, experiences where I saw churches. There was one church in Ohio that was it was actually called a vital merger. It's where 3 or 4 churches merge together.
Oh, wow.
They sell all their buildings,
and
move
they come
into
to
something
one location.
new, and move into a new location. The guy who kind of describes this vital merger is a farmer. He grew up farming, and he said you can't take pigs from pen A and put them in pen B because the pigs from pen B will beat up the pigs from pen A. But if you take both of those pigs in the pen, both of those bacon, no offense to your vegetarian listeners, if you put them in pen C, then they learn to get along together.
Yeah, because it's
a new space. Mm-hmm. So this is sort of like, if you move in with your partner in your partner's house,
it's their house.
Always your partner's house.
Yeah.
But if you and your partner get a different new house, then you learn to live in it together. So this particular church in Ohio, it was a vital merger. They knew that the local high school or school district did not have a performing arts center for graduation, for band, for all those things. So they decided that when you sell like 3 or 4 church buildings, you have a lot of money.
Yeah.
So they built a brand new church.
That's
and
cool.
They built the auditorium for the local school district.
That's beautiful.
So nobody's asked me that before, by the way.
Oh.
So you're getting new information here.
I like to see the whole picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the way I think about vision is it's like a puzzle.
Yeah.
But there's not just one picture that it can create.
Yeah.
So the best way to have the most options for the number of pictures that you can create is to have more puzzle pieces on the table.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the more puzzle pieces you have are like, I saw this over here. I saw this over here. I experienced this church doing this. And then the other way is to just relationships.
Yes.
So that brings us to the local experience. And at about year 2 of my being the pastor of Sycamore Creek, I realized I'd spent 2 years only getting to know church people. And so I went on this networking binge in the Lansing region.
Yeah, because you're everywhere, right?
Well, I am everywhere a lot these days, but I wasn't back then.
Okay.
And I'm partly everywhere right now because Sycamore Creek, we promoted our Potterville campus pastor to executive pastor, so now I don't have any administration either.
Ooh.
And so I just have freedom to go out and build relationships.
Oh, that's cool. You got the time.
At least for the season right now. My church is basically paying me to be a professional networker.
That's cool.
A relationship builder. So about my second year of ministry, this was 13 years ago, I decided to go. I'd read a book. There's another puzzle piece, reading books. And it had presented this idea of networking. And I went to the school superintendent in Holt, which is where I started. And I just set up a meeting. Said, I don't have any issue. There was no agenda. I just want to get to know you. I want to talk like community, school, whatever. So we sat down. He got it. And we talked for maybe 45 minutes, an hour. And then towards the end of it, I said, who are your best 2 principals? And he told me. So I went and met with them. And then I talked to them and asked them, who are your 2 best teachers? And I went and talked with them.
That's awesome.
And then I asked who are the parents or community members I should meet. Eventually, I made my way to the Lansing Arts Council.
Oh, cool.
And as I was meeting with the director at the time, Chad Swan-Badrow walked through the room. And she said, hey, you should meet Chad. So Chad and I got together for lunch and really just hit it off. At the time, Chad was just about to get married to his husband, Matt, and he was looking for a church that was not traditional, that his husband would feel comfortable in.
Yeah.
And, of course, that wasn't going to beat them up for being gay.
Yeah.
So they found that at Sycamore Creek.
That's awesome.
And Chad and Matt and now their son attend regularly. They're partners, what we call membership. We call them partners because you partner with us in our mission.
Yeah.
And
I like that because it puts it more in an action relationship orientation than like a consumer type orientation.
Like I'm a member of the gym.
Yeah.
I pay my fee and I use their stuff.
Yeah.
And that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for partners in our mission, which, that's partners in justice as well.
Absolutely.
But Chad began attending. I learned that Chad was the founder of Peppermint Creek Theater Company. It started back in 1995. It's a community theater.
Is that local Lansing?
It's local Lansing.
That's cool.
There's a handful of them that I've come to learn. These are people who are not getting paid to run community theaters.
It's just a passion.
It's a passion. Yeah, it's a sense of mission. So in Chad's instance, in Peppermint Creek's instance, it is to do justice, to focus on justice and to entertain, both of those things. Yeah. So their plays are not bubblegum musicals. They're not like just go and be entertained. They hit heavy topics.
Cool. Can you give me some examples of have you guys done anything recent that kind of sticks out?
Yeah. So the opening musical for it was literally the first musical at Stage 1, our Performing Arts Center at Sycamore Creek Eastwood, was called The Prom. And The Prom is about a teenager who wants to go to prom, but she wants to bring her girlfriend. Yeah. And the PTA, which is running the prom, doesn't want this to happen. And so they shut it down, but then they can't shut it down because that's illegal. Yeah. So they just run a simultaneous prom somewhere else. Yeah. And she shows up and she's the only one there. Meanwhile, all of these B-list Broadway stars who are falling out of interest or the public radar find out about this, and they see it as an opportunity to raise their stature or in the community by going and protesting, and they both mess it up big time with good intentions and also end up helping as well. So it's an entertaining. That one's not particularly heavy. Yeah.
But it's reality, right? Because a lot of kids in high school spaces. I mean, being a teacher, so before I do what I do now, I was a teacher in certain conservative spaces, and that's a very common conversation that happens in front of the kids and behind their back about how inappropriate it is to go outside this heteronormative culture. And I think that is a really beautiful story to start off, especially with, from what I understand, the kind of history of your space here in Lansing.
Yeah. It was perfect. It was entertaining. It was fun. It was flashy. It was a musical, and it also hit on a justice issue of inclusion and belonging, and
that's cool.
And also, it's the themes of coming out to your parents and all that kind of stuff. And so another one that Peppermint Creek did was how to defend yourself last season. It was about this one was super gritty, not a musical. It was about a rape on a college campus, and the person or someone who was close to the person who was raped decided to start a self-defense class to teach people
how to protect themselves.
And it's gritty. It is not anything you would expect in a church. The language is just totally real and authentic. But I left there. I leave these. This is long before they were in our building, but I often leave Peppermint Creek shows feeling like I have been to church more than I am in a lot of churches. They're dealing with real life.
we talked about in the last episode with John Mark about these non-traditional, what we think of non-traditional spaces being a place of worship, right? So concerts, we're talking about plays, right? I think that's really beautiful. It brings the sacred into the mundane, which is super important, I think, to orient ourselves as we move through life. I want to get back to something because you pointed out that you have 3 different locations. And so you kind of straddle these different demographics of people. And I'm wondering, is there an intersection that you bring communities together? Like, what kind of things have you seen in the rural versus like the suburb or the city? And how are they the same, different?
Yeah, that's so. I think that we're a relatively uniquely positioned church for being experimental with how we navigate the challenges that face our current society, culture, country. And we have a suburban origin, so we have a good chunk of suburbanites who attend. Our South Lansing campus is a firmly urban South Lansing context.
Yeah.
Our Potterville campus is a firmly rural campus, small town, rural America. And our Eastwood campus, where I'm at, kind of straddles city, suburbs, college town.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, when you put all of those things together, we've got America.
Yeah.
And what we have found now, I would say that we don't have at any of our campuses, we don't have many people on the far poles.
Okay.
But
meaning, will you elaborate a little bit on what you mean by far poles? You're talking about like politically? Are we talking? What do you mean?
Politically or culturally.
Okay.
Culturally, I mean that when you look at, like, if you looked at my lifestyle, for example, it looks pretty conservative American.
Okay.
I mean, I'm married to a woman. I got 2 boys. We have 2 cars.
Yeah.
We don't have any pets because we got all kinds of allergies in our house.
Yeah.
We go to the grocery store. I occasionally shop at Sam's Club and feel like a little bit of my soul gets shaved off every time I walk through the doors. You know, this is not a super radical lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I know that now my wife and I have lived in some radical lifestyle, like cooperative housing situations. In fact, only until recently, until we started this new campus, for our 27 years of marriage, we have generally shared our house with someone, another adult.
Okay.
And while we were in seminary, we lived in what's called a new monastic house. It's a sort of Christian cooperative living with unhoused who live with you and all kinds of urban farming. And I lived 3 years. That's a really radical.
I mean, that's pretty cool.
It wasn't like all the way communist or communal in the sense that we shared possession of everything. So there was one couple that owned the house, but we did share the use of most things.
Like interconnected relationally.
Yes.
And how you move through the space. Yeah,
you need a car. Yeah, my car's available. Just take it.
Like, that's awesome.
I'm not much into gardening, but there was the couple who owned the house were huge urban. It was a double lot, so we had some big gardens, and we collected all the rainwater and it wasn't their garden, like they made it for the house.
Yeah.
So when I'd be cooking dinner, I'd go out and I'd pick stuff and cook it for dinner.
Yeah.
It's fabulous. I tried to start a community garden when I moved to Lansing, and I realized that I don't like gardening. I like going out in a garden and picking the food and cooking it.
Yeah.
But you need all those things, like in every movement. You need the people who grow it and the people who pick it and cook it. So I forgot where we were going on this.
That's
what
okay.
was the question? So this was city, country, suburb?
Yeah, like how they kind of intertwine. But before we get to that, I do want to point out something, is that oftentimes we put ourselves in boxes that we're like you said, that you're living a very, kind of normative lifestyle. Mm-hmm. But underneath, that's not the reality, right? Because I've even heard conversations that you've had with your children or in the community. I know that we've sat in a classroom, talking to different staff members, and I've heard you say different kinds of things. And so I want to take the preface off of material and look more internally, because I think that's more important. And what Sycamore Creek is doing is just a amplification of that, right? So back to the question, I was just wondering, you don't really see, you kind of said that you don't have anyone on very opposite ends of the spectrum as far as like politically or culturally, but what are the differences you see, and what kind of barriers or challenges or even maybe great things that you encounter?
So you're gonna find in our rural spaces more Trump supporters. You're gonna find in our urban spaces more Harris supporters. You're going to find in our rural spaces people who are more skeptical of the city or urban spaces. And you're going to find in city spaces people who are more skeptical of rural spaces. Both groups of people think they might die if they go in the others. I mean, literally might think they might get killed. If you're a black person going out, in the
that
country,
could be true. Very true, right?
You might get killed. If you're a white person who worries that you think you might get killed in the city. Now I read that and I see like, oh, there's some internalized racial superiority there. But those are some of that's the diversity that exists inside of our church.
Do you find your 3 campuses coming together to be in community with each other, or are they kind of island off into their own?
So we do, when you look at like how multi-sites work, there's kind of 2 poles. One is a franchise model where everything is exactly the same. Like if you go to McDonald's, there's a McDonald's in Potterville. If you go to McDonald's in Potterville and you go to McDonald's in somewhere in Lansing, it's going to be almost identical food. And some churches who do multi-site expect that kind of uniformity.
Because you go to each space and they should be the same.
Yes, exactly the same. Preaching more or less the exact same thing. Everything is exactly the same. And then on the other end would be like, in some ways, the United Methodist Church is a multi-site because we have churches in everywhere. Small town in America. But there's little to no uniformity across United Methodist churches. We're somewhere in between. So there is some continuity that we hope for, but also you're in a different context. So we have to trust that the campus pastor in Potterville knows how to speak to Potterville people or rural folks about including LGBTQ people. So
that's a hard conversation, especially if you're...
So when our denomination was looking at splitting, we had to have that conversation really publicly. And more or less, we were able to bring along our rural campus with losing very few people.
That's beautiful.
And the shift was almost breathtaking, how quickly they were able and willing to come along with identifying as an affirming church in a rural setting.
So I guess some background, was there work that you had to do very intentionally in those spaces? Because I know a lot of times when we transition into something, if we don't have a lot of foundation, that transition is more topical than it is internally. And so you could see things like microaggressions or just, hiccups. And it's no fault to anyone. There's always going to be, bumps in the road as you're growing, anyone in any situation. Did you?
So some of that plays into a little bit of my background. Turns out that when you launch a church in a diner and a church in a pub, you become a sort of minor celebrity in the United Methodist Church. And Potterville UMC had attended coaching sessions of mine or workshops.
Oh, cool.
So they really liked what they saw.
So there's like a precursor to this foundational work that was being done. Before they were even
adopted, they were reaching out, like they were seeing the leadership that I had at Sycamore Creek. They were appreciating it and trusting me as not the leader of their individual church, but as a denominational leader.
I think that comes back to your relational thing too, right? So if we create relationships with people, they're more apt to trust us down the line instead of just showing up and be like, I know what's best. This is how it's going to happen, right?
Another piece of my background is that I did grow up in the evangelical church. And I have recently come to realize not just evangelicalism, but fundamentalist evangelicalism. I didn't notice it because being a white male, heterosexual, cisgendered man, it's all built to support me.
Yeah.
And so I don't have any trauma or wounds from those experiences. I married out of that. I didn't ever leave or have to make a choice to leave or get kicked out. I just married into United Methodism, where I had a really supportive place to do the sort of deconstructive work. It wasn't working for me theologically or intellectually anymore. So I had a supportive place that gave me lots of resources to do that.
First, thank you for just acknowledging that piece of you, because I think that's hard for a lot of us to come to the table and talk about our privilege. It's a barrier, but I think once, and maybe you can give us a little bit more background to this too, but once we step over that threshold, it opens up so many doors and opportunities for progress, growth, relationships.
Now, before 2016 and leading up to 2016, with the Trump takeover of the evangelical world, I would have referred to myself at that point as a progressive evangelical.
Okay.
I
did not know such thing existed.
Yes, there's a whole movement of progressive evangelicals.
So what does that look like what framework would that?
It would look like economic justice. It would look like climate justice. It was a little slower in getting to issues around sexuality.
Yeah.
It was equality, though, and gender.
Okay.
So a lot of you might call them like socialist evangelicals, roughly, who were very, very, very motivated by the structures around poverty.
Okay.
And dismantling those, but also who held really generally historically orthodox views on things like God and Jesus, the Trinity.
So very traditional with this like liberal socialist kind of meshing in.
And a lot of times I'll say that I am historically orthodox Christian and progressively liberal politically or socially. And that's kind of a fairly good reflection of Sycamore Creek.
Oh, that's cool.
So back to your question, though, about in a rural setting, I can talk evangelical.
Yeah.
I have that background.
You have the language.
I have the language. Yeah. I still share some of the values. I've left a lot of them and seen how harmful a lot of them are.
Yeah.
And Sycamore Creek has become a place where people who experienced a lot of harm and hurt, church hurt in those settings, have come and found healing. But I can talk about Jesus.
Yeah.
And I can, in fact, put me next to a conservative Christian, and I can talk Jesus with you all day.
Yeah.
And that builds bridges.
Yeah, and I think it's necessary too, especially when you're talking about hard-hitting things like racial economic justice, but also queer justice, right?
Yeah.
And those are things that you often see conservatives be very against, especially if we're looking in a religious orientation. But that common ground, right, that you can lay in building a relationship to have those conversations. I know personally in inclusive justice, we usually do an event every year. We have people from many different denominations or spaces come. One in particular that I'm always reminded of is this older white Catholic gentleman. He comes in, he talks about how conservative his space is. He talks about how hard it is to be in the spaces where at one point he didn't have the knowledge. He's not queer, right? He doesn't come from a background of understanding, but he takes the time just to listen and then takes that back to his space and makes change, right?
Yeah, so I have a family member who's still in that space. I'm not going to call them out publicly.
They know who they are.
A family member I deeply love.
Yeah.
And some of my goal has just been in having conversations with this person about our differences has been to make it complicated for them when they are in their conservative fundamentalist Christian setting and their friends talk about those people.
Yeah.
And they realize one of those people is their family member who's a pastor in a marriage for 27 years with 2 kids that we sing hymns and read the Bible at home and is planting churches and all of these things that for them don't go in the box. Like, because I know when I was in that setting, when you were...
it's not a yes and.
It was if you're affirming of gay people, if you're like have any sort of socialist or progressive leanings, you obviously are not a Christian.
Okay,
but when you know me that well, and you're my family member, you're like, I can't say he's obviously not a follower of Jesus. He obviously is, and he obviously doesn't see things the way I do. So it's staying in the tension of that. I think what I've had to learn over time, and this is maybe, again, the rural piece, is to be willing to live inside the tension.
Yeah.
This is part of internalized racial superiority or white supremacy, is being uncomfortable with tension.
Yeah.
And not wanting to divert the topic or
being
smooth
nice
over the differences or being nice white parents.
We just talked about in our last episode. Chimamanda Adichie talks about, instead of being nice, be kind.
Yeah.
Right. And so that kind of gets us away from making space for the loud, very hateful person in the room because it's uncomfortable to cause a scene, right? Or shake up things that in the normal flow. And so I like that you pointed that out. Even in for me, I don't come from a Christian background, right? I'm a UU pagan, and so I never went to church. The UU was the first church I came into, and so for me, it took me a long time to deconstruct this idea that when you say Christian, you don't necessarily mean the conservatives yelling outside of Planned Parenthood. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think it's really beautiful to hear, your side of things and how you wrestle with that even in your own family.
Yeah. When I was at Pride, we were one of two churches that had a booth at Pride in Old Town in Lansing this year, and one person in the gay community came up to me and said, if that person shows up across the street again with their bullhorn preaching hellfire and damnation, would you go talk to them? And I said, yeah, I would be willing to, but just so you know, they probably hate me more than they hate you.
Yeah, because you're like a bastardized version.
Yes, I'm the one has the power to open the arms and include you, so they hate the person who's sort of upending the structure, the power structure, more than they hate the person that you're opening the doors to try to include.
Yeah.
And so
because the call is coming from inside the house.
But at the same time, this is the thing. If you came to our rural campus and you said, I'm a pagan, non-binary, you probably don't want to lead with that if you want to build relationships. Unless,
So I want to push back on that. So I come from a conservative background. My family is rural. I grew up in bumfuck nowhere in between Onondaga and Eaton Rapids. And so I come from generational poverty. A lot of my family are Trump supporters. And so for me, it's hard to ride that line of, should I make someone else comfortable to bridge the gap, or should they make space for me before I get there? And if those spaces are even worth my time and energy going into, and that's like a hard thing, because as activists, we want to change the world, right? But also we have to there's boundaries and understandings that need to be set up. And so I always struggle with that, two hands. Thanksgiving dinner is usually a hot pot mess at my house. So
it's all right. Let's just say that this is a growing edge for me, figuring out how to do this in a way that I don't have the luxury at this point of saying, the rural spaces around Lansing are spaces that I can write off or say you're not worth it, because I'm the pastor of one of those spaces.
That's not even what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that so if your intention coming into your rural spaces is that you lead with something else instead of who you are, is that space really inclusive? And so, it's not saying that they're not worth it, because I know a lot of rural people that are super beautiful. They they may not come to the table at the same things that I agree on, but
I think the difference might be maybe I'm positing that I'm the lead pastor of Sycamore Creek, which comes with it a lot of power.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I have to be careful with how I execute or exercise that power. And I can blow people out of the water with that power. And in doing so, I lose the chance to influence or build a relationship.
Absolutely.
Now, if you are coming into that space as a layperson, absolutely, be who you are. As a pastor with the office behind me, I just have to tread a little more lightly, or that's the approach I've taken. It doesn't mean that I am trying to get rid of all tension or anxiety in the space. It's a question of how do you insert an appropriate amount of anxiety
without
that doesn't
overwhelming
blow up
someone.
the relationships.
Or not just that, just like make it where the foundation is not ripe for relationships, right? Especially in those spaces. And I completely agree. I want to kind of back up a little bit, though. I want to talk more about the welcoming environment that you have for the queer community. And specifically, I know that, in the Methodist tradition, you had this like schism, and for a while there was inclusive, but you weren't technically allowed to marry queer people. And now you are, which is so beautiful. I remember hearing the news and like cheering for you guys because I thought that was super sweet. But also, how do you navigate that as a leader? And what would you suggest to other spaces that are still kind of in that model, and how they can help their tradition move towards inclusivity?
Phew. How do you help a whole like denomination across a continent or a world move towards inclusivity? That's a big question.
Well, let's start with small. What did you do?
I'm glad I'm not in the position to have to figure that out on a regular basis. But so in some sense, this was a theoretical issue for me. Because I never got asked to do or preside over a gay wedding while our denomination was not allowing for that to happen. And it would have our church, I would have needed the backing of our church, my local church, to be able to do it in a way that protected me as well as the person getting married.
So they just couldn't like fire you tomorrow for...
Yeah, well, I could be defrocked. And then I was thinking about, like, for example, when our denomination, this was first coming up around 2019. It's been coming up for 30 years. But when it really was coming to a head, we had a special gathering of United Methodists from around the globe in 2019 to try to figure out this one. It was like a one agenda global gathering. And in the process, actually what happened was the conservatives had the vote and they tightened the restrictions and made the penalties more punitive for overstepping them or not following them. And my wife had breast cancer in 2018. And so this is where like there's an intersectionality of all kinds of justice issues. I lose my job, I lose my insurance, so all of those things are also on my mind. How would I do this in a way that also doesn't undercut the well-being of my family? And really, like the strategy in our denomination, there was a sort of subversive strategy amongst pastors who were willing to do these sorts of things. And one of them was we had a very supportive bishop in Michigan and generally supportive district superintendents.
Oh, cool.
So one was, don't surprise them, let them know what's going on. Ask not to have your picture put on social media. So please don't take pictures. I actually at one time presided over a wedding, not a gay wedding, but where the bride and groom didn't want pictures on social media. So I just made an announcement from the
that you were doing
top. The bride and groom request that you can take pictures, as many as you want, but please don't put them on social media. Share them the old-fashioned way through email. And
which is a hard thing nowadays, right? It's very like normal to just snap something and it goes right up into the web.
This is someone who had a military background and had potential like threats on their head.
So it makes sense.
And didn't want that. And I mean, we can get in. I'm a pacifist, so there's tensions always like in the midst of all that myself. But the idea was, okay, so do it as quietly as possible. Another idea was to do it in whatever way you want, but have a friendly person bring the complaint
Okay.
So if you were another United Methodist pastor, you would lodge the complaint against
so it's not
me
as aggressive
with the bishop. And the process for working through that was the bishop would call the two of us together, and we would do a reconciliation meeting and come to some agreements. And I would be sitting across the table from someone
that you already had a conversation with and understood.
Yeah. Who was doing this with me.
Yeah.
And then no one else could bring up a complaint.
That's really smart, especially like strategically using the system against itself in that instance, right?
Yeah. So the system, this was something we didn't hit on before, is that it's easier to critique evangelicalism from inside evangelicalism than it is for evangelicals to hear critiques from outside of evangelicals. So in the same way, the system, if you know the rules of the system, you can figure out how to subversively work within those to accomplish the outcome that you want, which is blessing and presiding and helping two people make a lifelong commitment together. And in my view would be like that's a practice or act of discipleship of following Jesus and learning about in marriage. I think when you make a lifelong commitment like that, you learn something about the unconditional love of God from your partner's love of you. Yeah. When you're completely naked standing this is at its best, right? This is not how marriage always works, but at its best, you stand naked in front of your partner and they love all of your wrinkles and all of your whatever your body as it is. And in that moment, there's a moment of grace. And then there's a giving and receiving where you learn to love the other person as well unconditionally. So you're learning that unconditional love with them. And that shouldn't be held from gay people. No, like they should have access to that commitment and that blessing by the church. And
I mean, and even outside. So like I remember, this was back in Lansing when Michigan Pride was still doing Pride. And so it was huge. We had it was still in Old Town, but we had the parade and we used to do, near the river, we would do like marrying, right? A mass marrying of people. And I mean, we were teenagers marrying each other in the streets, right? Yeah. Whatever. And so that symbol was attainable, but the things that the system affords to you because you have a piece of paper that says you're in partnership with someone else is not. And so like you talked about insurance, right? And it comes back to these systematic oppressions where because you feared for your wife's health and your family's health, you weren't able to take action on certain things at certain moments because we have to step back and take care of ourselves, right? And I think that that's intentional.
Yeah.
And so...
Well, this is what I've learned, though, as a white, cisgender, heterosexual man. Yeah. That sometimes I do have to put myself at risk. Yeah. And in fact, a lot of times I have to. Yeah. And if I don't, then nothing will ever change. So I know I was willing to, and my wife was willing to take the risk if somebody came to us and said, we'd like to be married. The gay people in our church, who knew the current situation, none of them were ready to get married. Yeah. And the ones who were close were like, we don't want to put you in that harm's way either. Yeah. But if someone had come, I think my wife and I would have taken that risk because
I like
it's the right thing to do.
It is. And the plan B is amazing, right? Yeah. You have this way to kind of go around the system a little bit. And I think that now you don't have that problem, right? It was, when was the decision passed? It wasn't too long ago. Yeah.
This year, just several months ago. Yeah. That was a huge turning point. And now we can actively and publicly say, we'll preside over gay. And this is like, I want to be a little careful in the way that I talk about my own faith family. Yeah. Because the change in me took decades. It didn't happen. Yeah. And so this is a little bit like I'm patient with people because I realize like I didn't become affirming in one conversation. Mm-hmm. It was decades of people being patient with me and continuing to put things before me. And then ultimately it was because I actually met gay people and realized that that's what I've said, like whatever, like I think you can apply this to anything, justice issue or whatever, but whatever you think of a group of people, all of the things you think, they never survive actual contact with that group of people. Yep. And you can say that with like whatever you imagine about rural people and Trump lovers, like it doesn't survive.
Yeah.
Your impressions of them don't survive actually meeting with them. And my impressions or whatever boxes I'd put gay people in didn't survive meeting with them.
Yeah.
My contact with in anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, communists, socialists, like whatever, is always like, oh, okay, well, that's not what I thought you were.
No, right. Our perception of things is altered. I agree to a certain extent. I know that personally, when I get down to talking about values, I often find that the bridges are much closer than we like to think about, even with my, loving Trump supporting family. The piece I would draw the line is the actions that people take to oppress others' right to just exist, right?
Yes.
And so I always struggle with that conversation in my head because, I'm a very balanced person. I like to look at all sides of the equation. And so looking top down, I can empathize with someone's background. And we just talked about this in the last episode too. So it's all connected. Where you didn't have the tools, you didn't have the capacity to do X, but also my boundaries and accountability. And so learning how to juggle those two things is a topic that's very on my mind, especially lately, because it's a hard line to walk, especially when we're talking about relationships.
Yeah. I think, so I was reading Adrienne Marie Brown's Emergent Strategies book, and she said, if you haven't read Octavia Butler, set this book down.
Stop and do it literally right now.
Yeah, right now. So
Yeah.
I was like, well, I'm following her lead, so I haven't finished her book yet because I put it down.
Oh, it's so good.
I started to read Octavia Butler, and she's amazing. And I haven't, so I'm now on an Octavia Butler kick, and I started with Kindred.
Okay.
And are you familiar with that?
I am familiar with all
her work. So let me just give
a
quick summary for the people who are not. A woman who's black in the 1970s somehow ends up being transported in time back to the 1800s to basically meet her ancestor, who happens to be the son of a plantation owner. And his a rape of a slave. Yeah. There's no way to parse the power dynamics there.
Yep.
So she, the offspring or the children of that rape are her ancestors.
Yeah.
So the way that she gets pulled back every time is because the white guy, the plantation owner's son, his life is in danger. So every time she gets pulled back to the 1800s, she has to save his life.
And it's like a hard space to be in. And I think that what I love about Octavia Butler is that she really, first off, she's prophetic, period. She is a prophet. And she tells a story that pulls you in, and it has all these undertones of exactly what we're experiencing or other people in our community are experiencing at the same time. And it's just this beautiful balance. And she, beyond talented.
Yeah, I get the sense there's a lot of probably well-written criticism. I mean like engagement. Yeah. Like literary criticism in a positive way. Yes. Conversation about what she does.
Oh yeah.
And I haven't read any of that. I've only read her stuff, and she plays with time in a way that causes you, at least me as a white person reading it, to open my mind and imagination to sneak stuff in. Yeah. And before I know it, I'm like, damn, she got me again.
Yep.
Like I was, and but in this dynamic of this woman from the 1970s going back in the 1800s and having to save her white ancestor who's a jackass, he doesn't survive like her impression of. I mean, yes, there are definitely places where he does, and he's horrible, and he has internalized racial superiority 100%. But then he's also a human being who elicits her compassion from her, and it's just a mess.
It's beautiful,
and it's also really clear. It's mess, and the morals are really clear, and that messiness is like the place I live all the time.
Which can be exciting and exhausting, right?
Absolutely.
And something, as I do a lot of ancestral work in my personal practice, and a lot of the ancestral. Okay. Yeah. So like when looking at my ancestors and giving reverence to them, but also understanding the trauma and baggage that they gave to me, but also the strengths.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's a really hard thing to look at, especially being, a white person, and understanding my place in everything, and like what came before and what work I have to do to continue to move forward, especially with my own children, because I do have kids. And so I find her work to be, like I said, she's a prophet, right?
Yeah.
Parable of a Sower was like...
Yeah, that's what I'm reading right now, so don't ruin it for me.
I won't.
I'm only about halfway. They're on their way walking toward the north.
Oh,
so,
it's good.
Yeah. And I thought Parable of the Sower was about something until it wasn't about that, and then it was about something else. Yep. And I'm like, man, now she's really got me hooked, because it's not just like prophetic, but it's a damn good story.
Ooh, it is.
So
she's...
Yeah.
Whew.
So I'm glad Adrienne Marie Brown told me to put her book down. I mean, it was a good book too.
Yeah.
Fabulous book from what I read. But one of the things actually I picked up from Adrienne Marie Brown that's maybe related to the question that got us down this of like, if you're in that setting, what do you do?
Yeah.
She described, and I saw this posted somewhere else. This wasn't Adrienne Marie Brown's description, but there was a graphic I came across that was like the ecological world of justice.
Okay.
And basically Adrienne Marie Brown, if I were to translate her back into a Christian worldview, I would say she's describing what St. Paul talks about as the body of Christ, but just the justice oriented of it, that everybody has a function. So this is why, like, you might walk into a rural setting and maybe you start with, I'm non-binary, pagan, you, and that's the role you play. Yeah. And I walk in and I start with Jesus. I love Jesus. Yeah. Like, how do we love Jesus more? This isn't exactly how I'd start, but
you don't come in with like rainbows and butterflies and
and I'm a pretty average looking dude that I don't have any tattoos or piercings or anything.
You're safe. I mean,
and
you really are.
And in the ecology, like Adrienne Marie Brown is like nature. Look at nature. Like, how does everything work together? Yeah. The ecology of justice needs people who create tension.
Yes, absolutely.
And it needs people who
are
committed to the goals of the tension, but are a safe place for people who don't like the tension to come and feel like, okay, this person I can go talk to, and they're going to help me process the tension.
Yeah, explore that.
I'm not going to relieve it completely for you and let you off the hook, but there's so many similarities I can do it. And we need both.
Yes.
And that's as much as I got from Adrienne Marie Brown before I stopped it and went and read Octavia Butler. Yeah. Which I'm still not sure how Octavia Butler gets into Adrienne Marie Brown.
Oh, but, you'll see. It's good.
It's very good. Haven't finished Parable of Sower. You got a suggestion after Parable of Sower?
I mean, you should read the second one.
Okay. There's a Parable of the Sower too.
Yeah, well, it's not it's oh my gosh,
Parable of something.
Yes, and I cannot remember what it is, but it's also very good.
Okay.
And then I just read a book. I'll have to text you it. That is similar, not by Octavia Butler, but someone else that, through a science fiction lens, tells an incredible story attached to this very social justice, social norms undertone that really just hits you when you're not expecting it to hit you.
So I got to Parable of the Sower because I was talking with a black trans person in my church and talking about reading Octavia Butler, and asked if they had read it. Like, oh yeah, Octavia Butler's like saved my life. And I was like, well, which one should I read after Kindred? And they said Parable of a Sower. So I'm looking forward to finishing it and going back and talking with that person.
You have to let me know how it goes.
Yeah.
So great conversation. I want to kind of wrap us up, but first I want to know some actionable steps that you can give the listeners who may or may not be in the space that you are in, just a religious-oriented justice approach and like tangible things that someone can do tomorrow or next week, a year from now, to kind of orient their community and space to be more inclusive and attack those, systemic things that we need to address.
So there's a group that's called Resetting the Table.
Okay.
That is a really fabulous group to create spaces for people to dialogue across differences.
Okay.
And they have a movie they've created called Purple.
Okay.
And so check out Resetting the Table.
Resetting the Table. Are they oriented in any particular tradition, or is it just overarching?
It's a very ironic orientation. It's Jews who are funding organization to help Christians learn how to have different conversations with people from themselves.
Okay. I can't remember.
It's like the Jewish Justice League or something like that. But it's not. The staff aren't necessarily Jewish.
Yeah.
I don't know. That never even came up. It's just that I only learned that when we had to write the check to them, and it went to the Jewish Justice League. I don't know if that was the exact same thing. So then I looked up more about the group. I learned about them through Purple, the movie, and we showed Purple, and they had a discussion guide for having the conversations afterwards. They also have some workshops that help. There's actually a handful of groups like that.
Oh, cool.
If you're in the Lansing area, so Doak Bloss attends our church.
Okay.
Doak is a gay atheist in the theater community who comes to our church every Sunday. And he also is a facilitator of facilitators.
Okay.
So he trains facilitators, and he has done some facilitation training for us, and he also is running. We've got a workshop before the election, like 2 or 3 weeks before the election, and a workshop right after the election.
Okay.
About bridging differences through dialogue.
Cool.
So Doak Bloss would be a good person to reach out to, because if he's running that for us, I'm sure he'd run it for other places.
That's cool.
He has a CMH background as well. I think
CMH being community mental health.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for.
Yeah.
We're into acronym talk. Generally, in every space that you're in, or family or tradition or whatever you're in, there's some kind of group that is doing this sort of work.
Yeah.
One that I've become familiar with recently, because I've ended up with a lot of these kind of folks at my church, is the Post-Evangelical Collective.
Oh, cool.
And
I think we've talked about this
They
before,
offer a lot of resources for people who are coming out of evangelical churches, particularly evangelical mega churches, but not always. And they have gatherings, national gathering, regional gatherings. They have resources on their website for exploring this. They're starting to put out resources like books and so on that are
cool.
If I don't know whether evangelicals, progressives are listening to this podcast or not, but if they are, that's a great place to go and explore this sort of thing. They are an affirming group
that's cool.
And then they're doing some theological reworking around openness theology, because they realized that evangelical theology was some of the foundations for how we got to injustice to begin with. I think movies can be really powerful. We showed 13th and had a discussion after church one Sunday.
I like that. I like the discussion afterwards. You don't just leave it to like linger.
Yes.
You actually, as a teacher.
Yeah. So we had discussion. One of my fellow privileged white male cisgender heterosexual dudes I was in with, all of the privileges. We sat and talked, and he was just, I never knew.
Yeah.
Literally, a lot of this, for the people with privilege, you don't have to know this stuff.
Yeah. You
and
just have to listen.
So if you're in a setting, I think 13th is the 13th Amendment is about how 13th Amendment, we still do have slavery.
Yes, we do. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
And not a lot of people know that or understand the history and the progression of how things were shaped and formed to still fit the narrative that was, beginning America. And then that's why we're here, and people think that we don't have racism anymore and we don't have all these, systemic injustices. But that's great suggestions. If you think of any more, you can always text them to me, and I can put them underneath the show when it's released.
Can I share one more that was really exciting?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
So there's a movie out right now called Dee Dee.
Okay.
And
What's it on?
What's that?
Is it on like theaters?
Yeah,
is it
in
on
theaters.
A stream platform? Okay.
It's in theaters. And I'm sure it'll be streaming at some point.
Yeah.
But I go and watch a movie once a month with my oldest son, and then we go out afterwards and talk about it.
That's
so
cool.
I don't pick like, we're not like going and watching Marvel stuff. We're going and watching some deep stuff. I mean, sometimes, like 2 months ago, we went and watched Inside Out 2 because that's about puberty. And
that's deep stuff, though.
Yeah,
some of that stuff was for adults. Anxiety.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Anxiety gave John Mark anxiety.
yeah, exactly. But Dee Dee is about and I think it's an 8th grade Asian boy who is coming of age in 2008 during early internet.
Yeah.
And the conversation afterwards with my son was fabulous. And because that movie was right where he's in 8th grade.
Yeah.
It's right where he's at. And there's dynamics of race. There's dynamics of gender. There's dynamics of like masculinity, and how boys interact and girls interact and how they interact together, and immigration and all the challenges, because he speaks all English even at home. He can speak Chinese. His mom speaks some of both. His grandma doesn't speak any English, just Chinese. I mean, it's so you got everything wrapped up with internet culture, all in it. Early internet culture, which for
was
you
like
and
the
me
wild,
is
wild
like
west of
Facebook, MySpace, Instant Messenger, AOL, early YouTube. It was So
I mean, my kids still are in awe that I'm older than like Google or YouTube. It's like,
it's a walk down nostalgia lane, which was also in Inside Out 2.
Yeah,
for me.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so Dee Dee, go out, watch it.
Yeah,
adults would have a great time watching it too, but if you got kids,
and
it is rated R. It's got heavy language in it. But we don't, I mean, that's not an issue for us.
Yeah, no. And I do want to remind people too, oftentimes we think that kids don't have the capacity to hold really heavy things. And when we make things digestible for them in age appropriate ways, they can handle anything, right? And I think it's really, really important that this is the work that we're doing as parents, because if we don't, they get to their 20s and 30s are in complete utter shock and awe that there's this other way that people are living. And it's like, it's either one of two ways, right? It's, oh, well, now I have to wrestle with this, or that's not real, right? And so that's a beautiful
He said it was a great
point.
movie because for him, it was just real life. But in 2008.
Yeah.
In fact, one of his comments was, I didn't know slang was so similar back then than it is today. Like,
that's why I laugh, because people are like, these Gen Zs, they're slang. I'm like, do you remember the shit we were sputtering? I like, get out of here with that. But, yeah, great advice. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Again, I'm always reminded, like and subscribe on the YouTube stuff, but also if you're watching on the local network TV, you can definitely find Inclusive Justice on Facebook. We have a website. I am revamping that, so it should kind of be newer soon. But also, if you have a story or you want to come talk with us here, please reach out to us. We love to hear from anyone, especially in orientating our lives towards action. But again, I want to thank Pastor Tom for being here, and maybe we'll get you on the show again sometime soon.
Whenever you invite me back.
Awesome.